I'm Jay, your DM. I use he, him.
I'm Jerika, she, her.
And I'm Air. I use he. I had to think about it there for a second.
That's right.
I almost
Cool.
said she, him, and I was like,
Hey, that's a valid way to identify.
Yeah, but he, him is actually what I meant. I'm sorry, podcast.
You can just say the whole thing over again.
I stand by my father.
Nice. Good.
All right. Well,
Cool.
I actually watched this in McElroy's. They were giving a little lecture about how to make a podcast, and their first advice was to delete the first 5 episodes you make. So we already fucked that up.
You would concur with that.
I would agree. Yeah. Now.
Okay. Never listen to the first 5, y'all. Apparently they're terrible.
Listen, I mean, just delete. Like, when you're making a podcast, if you guys decide to make a podcast, record 5 episodes and then start releasing them. It's great
funny
advice.
because we recorded 5 and we're like, let's just release all these 5.
Yeah, they were fun. They were nice, right?
now.
We were so bad at what we did. But anyway, the other piece of advice that I really liked was they said, don't edit the personality out of your podcast, which means don't over-edit all the little asides and side conversations and getting off tracks, because that's your personality.
Does that mean I get to be as crazy as I want to be?
You do. People come to a podcast, like, you could go anywhere for D&D advice, but you could only come here for us giving D&D advice. And that's why we can't remove our personality. Otherwise, we're just D&D advice, and they can go anywhere for that.
But we're not giving D&D advice today, are we?
That's true. We are tabletop and board gaming advice. That's right. It is Pathfinder playtest day here. Hurrah! When we start this show, we generally do a dungeon crawl, and Air is going to kick us off today.
Here I am. I'm crawling. So in preparation for our playing the Pathfinder 2nd edition playtest, was consuming voraciously both the rulebook that has been released for
If
free
you
by
eat
Paizo.
it, you can't read it.
Osmosis is a perfectly valid means of knowledge acquisition.
Did you at least put ketchup on it while you were consuming it?
No, it was so piquant. That content was so spicy. It didn't need ketchup to wash it down. It went down smooth. A little bit of bite. Notes
Say
of
piquant
currant,
again
and
for me.
Piquant. Captain Piquant.
We'll get to that later.
Yes, I was watching tons of videos and reading tons of things about it. One of the things I happened upon was the gentleman from Dawnforge Cast, who had done a video about 2nd edition coming out, and basically was saying, you can roleplay in any system, but you can say objectively that one system has a more thorough rule set than the other, comparing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition to this new edition of Pathfinder. And while that's true, I was sitting there thinking, yeah, this is definitely, as I've dug into this, a lot more game. There's a lot more in terms of the rule set, in terms of class design, and how everything interacts with one another. And it tries to be as complete and thorough in terms of emulating a fantasy world as any system I've ever gotten into. It's definitely the most crunchiest thing I've read, because I'm still somewhat of a newbie in the TTRPG world. But I was then listening to an slightly older episode of Dragon Talk, where they had an entire 45 minutes of sage advice with Jeremy Crawford just going on about rules. And his number one tip was basically go and check out the DMG. Almost every question that came up, there was alternative rules in the DMG for all these different sorts of things, underwater combat and blah, blah, blah. And what I had realized is that 5e is not less complex or less complete. It's that they decided to kind of get the core rule book to be a very straightforward, a streamlined set of rules as possible. And then all the other stuff is living in other products like the DMG and also in Xanathar's Guide. Everything, they have alternate rules you can use. So I kind of thought back and I was like, I don't know, Dawnforge Cast guy. I don't know. I think it's been more compartmentalized in the 5e design, whereas 2e for Pathfinder It's all just there in the almost 500 pages that they have provided.
But yeah, the Dom Forgecast video is a pretty fair and objective look at the system. It seems like he really enjoyed the game. So everything is through sort of a positive light, which is fine. You know, you don't really want a negative light too much. But I think that he's pretty objective. And the things that I didn't like about the game, I could pick up on from his review. Like, it's not like he left anything out. I could definitely identify the things that he maybe said in a positive way. I was like, I don't know if that's for me.
Yeah, I want to say that everything he said about the game as he's taking it from like as written, it was definitely, I liked everything I read. And then it was when we got to play it that I was kind of like, maybe this one isn't for me. But we'll get to that, I'm sure.
My dungeon crawl is extremely short. It is simply that Adam Colbill is running the Pathfinder 2nd edition on the Roll20 Presents channel, and it is a pretty comprehensive deep dive look at the system. He has an episode on setting up as a DM for this system. He has an episode on setting up character sheets with his players, and then he has an episode now today actually starting an adventure and running a combat. So if you really want to dedicate like 5 or 6 hours to really understanding if this is going to be the system for you, I can't imagine a more entertaining way than with the company of Mr. Colbill and his Colbill crew.
He is a charmer, that is for sure.
He's a fun guy. I've been really addicted to his Let's Play series over the last couple weeks, so I'm coming around on the old Colbill train. Okay, Jerika?
So the lovely Blue Jay, Hadil, Kayla, and Lisa have all started a Star Trek TTRPG on Encounter Roleplay, and they have it set on Deep Space Nine, but they call it Deep Space 5. So I am riveted. I have been a huge Star Trek fan since I was a tiny child. And I continue to be. Not the only reason why I'm staying tuned. They have a Trill, they have a Betazoid, they have a Vulcan. I'm super excited about this exciting mix of people. I might be in love with one of them. At Insight Check Pod to let me know which one you think that is. Yes.
I have been excited to check that out as well because it's got some of my favorite people from the TTRPG, D&D, etc. community on there.
And two that we have talked to ourselves.
Yeah,
Indeed.
you said Hadil was on it? I didn't know Hadil was on that.
Yeah, Hadil is on it.
Well, there you go. That's more than
she
enough reason for me to check it out.
She plays the Vulcan, and I love it anyway.
That makes sense. I can see that.
I think her humor works very well with what a Vulcan gets you. So, yeah.
Sometimes on this show we answer questions, but now will not be one of those times.
Nope.
Because we are going straight into talking about Pathfinder in a segment that I believe Air has already titled for us. Why don't you lay down that intro for us?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to System Agnostic. A bit where we come into a brand new system having no feels about it whatsoever, or maybe some feels. Aren't we all biased? But anyway, we come in and try to get a sense of what this system is about. Is it for us? What we like? What maybe we're not so big on, etc. This episode featuring Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the playtesting.
It's a solid game with a lot of crunch and terminology that can slow down play. All right.
I give it good. 2 out of 5 air horns.
Womp womp.
That's it.
All right, we're done. Great. Let's do the outro.
Great, we did it. We did it. I think that really does kind of put it in a nutshell, though. When I was reading it, I was really excited, and I was like, "Oh, that's neat, and that's a neat idea, and that's a neat play on a kind of a what I believe to be a classic trope of fantasy tabletop RPG design." And then we played it, and it was like, I have a minus but a plus but a minus, but a plus. I'm just going to roll a dice and you tell me if it's okay.
I remember, well, our audience will remember we actually had an entire episode dedicated to rolling a character, and that was for a game that we ran inside the system. So we actually did play a full session in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. We also all built characters of many different classes. I actually even built my own character for no reason, because I wasn't in the game, I was the DM. But just to kind of try it out and see what it was like, I built well, originally it was going to be a 5th level game, but we ended up running it 1st level, so I actually built a 5th level rogue fighter multi-class. And it was really interesting. The character creation is my favorite part.
Seconded.
Yeah, it was Jerika, you can kind of be a barometer here. Did you feel at any point in the process kind of like overwhelmed by the choices?
Yeah.
There's a lot of choices, yeah. So we were originally going to play 5th edition, and my players just could not do it. Like, it was so much to parse and so much to learn, and
it reminded me more of the way you build a character in Exalted than the way you build a character in Dungeons and Dragons. And it's not like they want to be one or the other, you know, they want to be their own thing.
Right.
But
it has that kind of flavor, so if they played Exalted, they can kind of understand where you're coming from a little bit. Yeah, it's all feats. I mean, we already went over this in the character building episode. Every level is a feat. It's kind of a joke when the system was first announced, because Pathfinder was really big on feats. They had a ton of feats, and going through those feats and finding synergies and combos was a big part of the game. Fighters got a feat every 2nd level, and then other classes, I think, got it every 3 levels. So it was already way more feats than you get in 5th edition.
It's a stampede of feats.
Yeah, that was one of the things that stopped me from going over to 5th edition right away, was that I was afraid, because there weren't so many feats. I was like, how am I going to customize my character? Like, how am I going to have any kind of options or choices? Because there's basically no choices in 5th edition. So I thought it was way too simplified, and I would never play 5th edition. Joke's on me.
They walk a very nice line, I think, with giving you a trajectory and then giving you options within that.
Yeah, you get a big choice at 1st level, you get a big choice at 2nd or 3rd level, depending on your class. You get a few big choices every 4 levels because of the way that your abilities progress. And then sometimes within your classes, depending on what classes you're getting, you're making smaller choices throughout the rest of your journey in the form of spells or certain abilities.
I find it's not arduous at all to be able to update a character in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that I could make a 5th edition character probably within 10 minutes at this point.
Yeah, especially with D&D Beyond and all the tools that they provided now. It is so great.
Are we the C team now?
Yeah.
Just pimping D&D Beyond. I mean, it's a great resource.
It is. Perfect voila.
Oh, how many times have you listened to that?
Oh, so many. It's a good tune.
It is a good tune.
I could probably go all the way up to probably 5th or even 10th level in 30 minutes, I would guess. Like, even picking spells and stuff like that. And part of that comes from familiarity with the system. Like, I know what everything has now. And that's something that you would eventually get with Pathfinder as well. You would become more familiar.
It's true.
But I don't think that there would ever be a point in Pathfinder where you could make a character that was as optimized in 10 minutes. Because there are so many more choices at every single level. You really do have to read each option available to you, because there could be something that suits your build or your playstyle more buried in all those feats, and you get a feat every single level.
I really wanted to say that. I was trying to contextualize my thoughts on the comparison. Obviously, it's going to be compared to 5e, and I do think that a lot of the design decisions they've made, now, I don't know the 1st edition of Pathfinder. I've been relying on Jay to kind of fill in those gaps for me, but it does definitely seem like there are hints or nods to 5e's way of doing things.
Yeah, you've got the proficiency system for one.
Yes.
TEML.
But I wanted to say that in terms of character creation, as that's what we're talking about right now, I find 5e to be very prefix, and I found 2e Pathfinder to be very a la carte as you were saying, like for 5e, everything is basically packaged. You got a race, and you might have a sub race with a package of options that just slots into that race. You'll have a class and a subclass that gives you a set of options that go in there, and you can tweak a little bit with feats here and there, spell selection. Whereas, yeah, as you're saying, Pathfinder, everything is feat. You're what they're calling ancestry, what we might call race in a D&D context. I actually really like the term ancestry.
Yeah, ancestry is better. Let's just all admit that.
Yeah, I absolutely. But there are feats there, like, and I kind of like that because it means like that selection of who you are genetically or whatever you want to talk about, culturally, maybe even, has progression to it. But there's feats for your class, and then there are general feats that you can pick. It is so piecemeal that you're right. You could pick and choose options forever.
I could see like an easy way to, I don't know, like make this better for me is to have archetypes. Just like if you want this sort of warlock, then choose these things. If
here are 10 feats that make this certain kind of build.
I felt like they were trying to lean in that direction because, at least for the bard, I rolled a bard character because I felt that was the class I knew best from 5e to maybe make some comparisons.
Which is funny because it's actually the most dramatically different, I feel.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And we'll get to that for sure. But it felt like there were like 3 muses. Bardic muses is what they go for, kind of their subclass, but really all they are is you get another spell, which is from the bardic list, like it's just an extra one you get, and it tells you which of the first class feats you get to pick. And the other thing is the next set of class feats, the prerequisites are for those 3 feats are one of the first 3 feats. So it does kind of lock you in. Like it felt kind of unnecessary to do that, because it was like, well, why don't you just, I mean, it really seems like you kind of have like training wheels on at the early levels of this class, because even though there are choices here, they're all synced up with one another until you get later in the class when they open up a bit more.
Yeah, so why present it as feats that you could pick between? Why not just say like, if you get this, you get this at this level. Yeah.
And it does open up eventually where you get to pick between 3 or so options for the class later on. So I think they've tried to somewhat shoehorn that in there, but still let it grow as you level up.
But I think we can all agree that our most fun we had was in the character creation process. Like, despite the kind of largeness of it, I don't know. I mean, I guess for you, Jerika, it may be different, but I felt like it was really interesting to look between all the options. It was really interesting to see the takes that they had on some of these classes. Everything I expected to be there was there, but sometimes in unexpected ways. And it was really interesting to pick between those feats, and it feels satisfying. It feels like you got some real choices that you can make. It can be a little bit much, and some of the choices are just clearly superior to others, but that whole part felt fine. Like, that's a different take, and it's a different system, and I can appreciate what they're doing there. It didn't feel like Pathfinder or 5th edition. It felt like a new game, and that felt worthwhile. So let's get into... Well, but first of all, I actually want to... So, Jerika, was that your favorite part of play? Building the character, or did you prefer more like once you got to the table?
I actually preferred role-playing more. And I think it comes down to familiarity. I think that if I knew some friends who were playing Pathfinder regularly and I had to learn it and make a character and all that stuff, I would know it better. But just because I am not familiar with all of the options and the ranges that you get, the character creation, I don't think in terms of Pathfinder 2nd edition. When I think about characters, I think in terms of D&D.
But let's get on to... First of all, Jerika, Ayer, I think you have the most fresh take on this, because Jerika, you've actually transitioned from previous systems before. But Ayer, this is your first time trying out a crunchy RPG on the level of D&D. So... how did you feel with the book? Did it help you where it needed to? Did you have a lot of unanswered questions? Did you have to go to outside resources?
I did go to outside resources. I consumed pretty voraciously. I do think it is good that they've offered this up as a play test, because some of the order and structure of the book, I felt a little bit off to me, because like one of the first things it tells you to do is generate your stats. But in order to generate your stats, all the boosts you get in their kind of point buy system come from your class, your background, and your ancestry. So you need to pick those first, but they are all listed later.
Yeah, I much preferred the way that Haley, Jerika, and Embers handled that, the way that they approached the character building, because that felt logical and it progressed well, and then it came together in the stats at the right time. The way the book lays it out, it just isn't practical. Like, you can't generate your stats if you don't have your background or your ancestry. It's not possible.
Yeah, so that was definitely, and then some of the finickier rules in there that we didn't realize until after, like any one of those sources of stat boosts, you can only boost a specific stat with it once.
Yeah.
Yes, so like you can't just use your like 4 free and you also get 4 free ones as well, and you can't use all 4 of those to just boost your strength if you're like a strength-based melee class, or you normally with your ancestry you get two set boosts and a free one. You can't use your free one to be one of the other 2 ones you got for free. It has to be something else. So I do like how much it like spreads out.
I really want to see someone or play a Pathfinder game where you can use them multiple times. I just want to see how wacky and crazy it is.
Yeah, and there's another finicky rule wherein like after 18, like normally a boost gives you 2 bumps up in an ability score. After 18, it's only 1. And caps out at 24. Like there was a lot of
it caps out at 24, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, plus 7.
Not a nice round number, but like 24 specifically.
24 is round.
But I mean, like, like 20,
you can divide
30,
it by many other numbers.
20, 30, 40, 10. Yeah. Those are like nice round, easy numbers.
The level cap
24
is 17.
is a hard number.
I'm kidding. That's not true. It's super hard. It came up in the fucking streets.
Hardest of numbers.
It's just a weird number to stop on. Stop getting my goose.
I think what it is
you have a goose?
Because proficiency in something is at best your level plus 3. So 7 plus 3 plus your level is kind of a flat 10 if you're
trained, expert, master, legendary. It's plus 4 is your best. Legendary.
Is it? Oh, okay.
I thought, because trained is 1, expert is 2, master is 3, and then legendary is 4.
Oh, okay. That
is untrained minuses?
-2.
Yeah.
Yeah, untrained is -2.
Yeah. So just getting to the system bit, there were things like I really liked. I liked on paper the idea of every round you just get 3 actions, and like movement is an action, and there are different types of movements that cost an action. Different sorts of attacks require a certain number of actions. I really liked the whole idea of the spell. They made the verbal, somatic, and material components of spells. Each one of those individual things in a spell costs an action. So if you have, a spell that only costs one of those things, you only have to say a magical word or twiddle your fingers. You can cast that 3 times in a round if you wanted to. So there were some really neat ideas with how they were kind of playing with the historical tropes of tabletop fantasy RPGs.
Yeah, single action spells are basically bonus actions, right?
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, and you could do essentially 3 bonus action spells if you wanted to.
Like get your big fireball off and then follow it up with like a little zap, Yeah,
and that's super neat if you don't move, but if you want to move at all, now your action economy, like your turn changes because like, oh shit, there's people coming at me, I need to run away. Oh, now I can't do that big 3 action spell I wanted to do. Even the martial classes, all the feats they have are designed around like ways to get around the multi-attack penalty they have, which means as a first level character you can attack 3 times at an increasingly punishing minus to your attack roll.
And one of them is like moving and attacking as one action, like charge.
Yeah,
you can move up to your speed and then attack. which is kind of nice.
There's
Helps
striding and then stepping, which is you only move 5 feet. It's like a disengage with a move kind of baked into it.
Which is so weird because they've nerfed attacks of opportunity so much that, like, why would you ever step? Like, it's...
Attack of opportunity is a class feature. Like, you have to... Fighters start with it, but I don't think any other class does.
Yeah, monks get attack of opportunity as well. But very few monsters have it. Like, very few. A few of the martial ones, but, like, not many.
It's crazy. Dwarves do have a racial thing that, like, lets them get around the first -5 penalty from armor. And I was like, that was one of the first things I saw. I was like, oh, this is going to be complicated.
Yes.
Jerika, you were building, like, a sorcerer. Maybe we could get into, like, spells, because I found I was, in comparison to, like, a 5e bard, I was overwhelmed by the spell options I got, because they're not, like, class-specific lists. They're 4 general lists.
I had a druid. From what I saw, they grouped the spells into smaller groups of spells for specific subclasses. So I don't know which classes needed to pull from the whole spell list. Maybe some of them do.
There's occult, and then there's arcane tradition, and then there's divine tradition, and then there's
primal.
one other tradition.
Primal.
So they
Primal.
Yeah, so they've, like, subdivided the full list into 4 lists. And that's pretty obviously, like, Pathfinder's pretty much based around, their entire business model is releasing more books with more classes. And by having these already subdivided lists of spells, they can basically just graft that list onto any new spellcasting casts they make. So
yeah, they didn't seem like any larger... Well, they were probably a little bit larger than the D&D spell lists, but not crazy.
Yeah, and the thing that makes them a lot bigger is, first of all, there are a lot more conditions in Pathfinder that you can afflict on someone, so there are spells for afflicting each of those conditions. And then they also each have 4 different states of success and failure, unlike 5th edition where it's either success or fail.
Yeah, and those conditions, like, the whole math of the roll is like your d20 plus the applicable stat plus your level of proficiency with it plus any sort of conditional boon plus any sort of conditional penalty, and you have to pick, if you have multiple boons, the highest boon, or multiple penalties, the biggest penalty. So all of these, like, I feel like they were trying to be like, oh, it's not going to be +1, -1, +1, -1, +1, -1. You won't have to do, like, a ton of math around these floating modifiers. But I think now it's just going to be like, oh, well, I have a +4 from this. Oh, no, but you have a -4 from that. Like, I think people are just going to constantly be listing all of the conditions currently affecting you. To be like, no, you actually have a -1, but no, but I don't. It's actually a -2. No,
yeah, and we dealt with the conditions a little bit in gameplay. I remember we had some frightened stuff going on and something else. I think
conditions each have a level, and that level is basically the penalty you take while you have that condition, and so it can be a little tricky to keep track of. Like, I've noticed in 5th edition, concentration is a constant problem. People forget concentration all the time. So how they're going to remember all of this, like, that they have Frightened 2, and that they have an ongoing spell, and that they have, you know, all sorts of things, it seems like a lot to kind of keep track of in your between-turn time. I want to talk about the terminology of Pathfinder 2nd edition, because I feel like this is the area that, as a DM, gave me the most pause towards playing this game again. Because I liked character creation, I didn't mind combat or how it played, and watching it today on stream, I feel like a lot of the hurdles can be overcome in time. Watching them play one combat and then play another combat, they got much quicker in the second combat once they had the basics down. And I feel like if our game had been a little more combat heavy, the second combat would have been a lot smoother than the first one was. So I think that there is a lot of this that can be ironed out with experience, but the terminology really worries me about this game, because every single ability has keywords in the upper right-hand corner. Or
Yep.
the upper left-hand corner. And those keywords, they indicate bonuses or penalties or conditions that this ability imparts on you, as well as certain prerequisites which have to be met in order to use the ability. During the ability, they will often use keywords to shorten the description of an ability. So this such and such attack will do such and such damage and inflict such and such status. And that by putting that status on there, they've trimmed down the descriptions of all the feats and abilities and class features to make them really short and readable at the table. But to me, that just splits up the work, because now you've read the ability out of the book. Now you have to flip to the other page and read the rest of the ability out of the terminology guide. And that's what I noticed during play, is we spent a lot of time. I literally, at one point, had to delegate researching terms to other players between terms because I wanted to speed up combat. And that's a very weird place to be as a DM. Like, I can't even manage the 4 or 5 different abilities which are keying off of each other in any given term. That's a lot.
So here's an example. So one of the neat things about bards is all classes have like their class abilities key off of what they call like spell points, which are kind of like, it's a secondary resource that keys off of your class's primary attribute. So as a bard, I had a whole second listing of what were essentially spells. They call them powers when they're class specific. One of this was counter performance, and it has, this is a first level thing. It has 5 different keywords: composition, enchantment, fortune, mental, and power. I can tell you, I know what 2 of those 5 mean currently.
That's funny, because for druids, we just get an extra spell to cast. I could cast Goodberry 4 times.
Yeah.
Ooh, yay.
It's an entire fruit salad.
Goodberry is really good in Pathfinder. Like, it's actually very good healing.
And this
delicious.
ability is and delicious. I mean, it's tangy. It's got that zip.
That piquant flavor.
Piquancy.
But it's like, to me, what it seems like is that they really wanted to simplify all of the descriptions in the abilities and things like that. And so they created this index of key terms. And if you memorize all of those key terms, then knowing what abilities do will be very, very easy.
Don't you think that would also come in time?
Yeah, exactly. So I imagine if you play this for a long period of time, you're going to memorize those abilities, or at least most of them, eventually.
When I watch DCA, I see Chris Perkins looking up conditions in his own games. It's just this extra thing that you don't remember, that you always have to refer back to, because your brain just falls right out. You have all this other stuff to think about, and D&D has it on a nice simple page, like 4 pages. So
there's like 8 conditions. It's like exhausted, petrified, stunned. There's a very simple list of maybe 10 conditions total. It's not long, and that's exactly what I was going to say, Jerika. That's literally exactly what I was going to say. Is like 5th edition has maybe a 4th or less of these terms, and I couldn't tell you what they all are off the top of my head. You just listen to me try and fail. And like, I DM a lot. I DM 2 times a week, every week for the last 3 years. And I can't remember them all. How am I supposed to memorize this whole 3 or 4 pages of very small print, bold words that are all important?
I wonder if some are more frequently used than others.
Oh, sure there are, but you're going to be pulling up at least 1 or 2 of those obscure ones every session, with the way that each ability has like 4 or 5 of these keywords. It's a lot. And it's just like, anything that keeps you going back to the book is bad in a role-playing game.
It's a bold statement, but I agree with you.
I mean, the C-Team will joke about how, like, this is real D&D when they have to crack open their book and look something up because they're not sure about something. But, like, that's because it's novel, because they don't have to do it every session. They don't have to do it every 3 or 4 sessions. It's like maybe every 5 sessions they have to stop and really research a spell and stop the game and go through it. Because a lot of 5th edition is this sort of freedom to act on a whim and do what you want and like just make it up as you go.
How do you want to do this?
Yeah, exactly. If it feels good, do it. That kind of attitude. I never got the feeling that it was intended to be played in such a way as I could make it up on the fly. And maybe that's another thing that would come with more experience with the system. The book at one point tells you, you know, DM's word is law, like you go and do what you got to do when you're running the session. But reading the systems, it felt to me like that was not how the game was designed. The game was not designed for you to adapt on the fly. The game felt to me like all of these were gears that were interlocked in a very well-tuned mechanism. And if I started fiddling with one of them, all of them were going to start behaving oddly.
One of the things I was really thinking about is, the gentleman from Dawnforge cast had said that one of the problems, quote unquote, not even problems, but part of 5e is this, its open nature. It is open to interpretation, which is why you have people on Twitter constantly bombarding Jeremy Crawford with questions about, well, what about this spell's interaction with this? And every time it's always, it's a DM's call, rules is written, here's what I think it is. But if I were at the table, I might adjudicate it this way. The more open a system is, like especially with something like Dungeon World, I really think that requires, and maybe not to toot my own horn because I guess I was running it, but it requires a good DM, or at least it requires a DM that can definitely think on their feet, because there are very few prefab conditions for a specific role.
I think it comes down to personality types. It comes down to personality types where some people like structure and some people don't.
I think that's absolutely true. If you're the kind of person who would thrive on a system that is trying to be as exacting and closed as possible, like, you know, there will be a right answer, this could definitely be up your alley. I don't think it's for me, just because that mental bandwidth thing, if I can't do it jazz, I don't want to do it at all.
I want to talk briefly about the possibilities for storytelling in Pathfinder 2nd edition. Jade, when you were making the adventure that we played, did you feel restricted at all? Or did you feel like, did you approach it the same way you would in another system?
That's one of the things that I think is hard to mess up in a role-playing game, is the stuff between combats. Because ultimately, a skill check is going to run pretty well no matter what. Like, I can pretty confidently, even in a system I've never run before, say, okay, this feels like something that should be left up to dice. And then look to a list of skills and find the one that seems most applicable to that dice roll, and then make that happen. So that's never really, for me, I don't feel like that's very easy to mess up. That being said, the combat encounter, I felt a little hemmed in, because the rules for how many enemies to target against a first level party are pretty harsh. There's not a lot of bandwidth there for a 3-person party to put enemies against them. So I was very nervous about how much I could push one way or the other. And that's, again, part of being new to a system. I don't know how easy it is to push a person over and make them die. And I'd heard that it was very easy to die in Pathfinder, because a lot of people were telling me that they'd already lost characters. And in my research, I'd heard about people going unconscious or even dying in their first session. So I was very nervous to go too extreme. So in that sense, I felt a little hemmed in. But as far as like the actual roleplay aspect, I don't know that a sensible RPG system can mess that up too much. I like the +10, -10 crit success, crit fail system, just because it offers more opportunities for those very comedic takes. And I think that you could even go a step beyond that and maybe have a +5, -5, or like have just a -5 failure. That's like you almost succeeded. If you fail by less than 5, you almost succeeded, but not quite. That's a variant rule in 5th edition that I think I'm going to adopt in my next campaign. That like difficult success where you fail, but by less than 5, so you succeed, but then you take a penalty for it. And I think degrees of failure are always a good thing to have in your RPG system. This really doesn't have degrees of failure, though, because you can fail a check and you can crit fail a check, but it's still not like you failed forward. You know, it's still failure. It's just how badly you fail. And also, they very specifically list what happens on a failure in this version, which is weird to me because I feel like that should be my job to determine what happens on a failure. I don't want this book telling my players what should happen to them because then they're going to be like, actually, the book says that this happens to me. So whatever you just said doesn't go. This book has told me that I take 3 damage and I have to start my turn over. It's like, okay, well.
Now I'm the DM.
Yes. And now I am DM. Hand me your glasses. That's where all my DM power is.
Makes sense.
You know, it's hard to mess that up. I would have loved to have seen a Degrees of Failure. I would have loved to have seen a bonds system from, this is newer RPG tech than 5th edition. It should have new ideas. And besides the feats at every level, which is really not a new idea, it's just a reinterpretation of an old idea, the only really new idea that they implement is the TEML system. I
do, because D&D talks about the 3 pillars of exploration and combat and the social encounter. And this one is really only 2 pillars, which they're calling exploration and encounter. Encounter
and then downtime is their 3rd pillar of play.
Yeah.
Which is very much Pathfinder because it's all about min-maxing again. You're making magic items, your training skills, your retraining feats. Yeah. Some of that I felt really interested by. It's like I learned how to read faster, so I forgot how to run as quick. It's really cool though to be able to sit down and be like, I want this magic item. I'm going to spend the next 3 weeks, and just you have the rules in front of you, you can do it. It's a very different expectation than the 5th edition. Magic items are only in forgotten tombs and weird old vendors.
Yeah, it's a lot less the expectation of a more high magic setting where, a +1 Sword of Flaming Death is just like, oh yeah, I got that in a box of Cracker Jack last week.
Yeah, absolutely. First level adventure has +1 items in it. It's crazy to me. I'm like, oh wow, okay.
How many air horns out of 5, Jay?
Wrap it up. Air horns out of 5.
Out of 5 air horns, I would say that this game is a very average 3 air horns.
How many air horns? Air horns out of 5.
Womp, womp, womp.
Womp, womp, womp. For the
4 air horns! Wow, you love it!
Generous.
Surprise, turn around! Air was in favor of it all along.
And you get an air horn.
For the system and the amount of thought and depth and complexity they've put into it, 5 air horns. Playing it at the table, 1.
What?
Can I give half an air horn?
We are never getting that Paizo sponsorship.
I'm sorry, Paizo. It's not my thing. I like less crunch. I just want to tell my little stories and occasionally have the dice roll.
I hear you.
Jerika, how many air horns?
2 air horns. Wop wop.
Wop wop.
Wop wop. So 1, 2, 3. There you go.
Yeah.
I think they've made great strides from the original Pathfinder, though. They are headed in the right direction. Hopefully, at the end of the playtest, when everything is settled out, maybe we'll play it again and see what's changed. See how it feels after some more hammering. As always, thank you for joining us here on Insight Check. I am Jay, your DM. I really enjoyed talking with you today. If you would like to leave us any questions or comments, or if you feel like it deserved more air horns, then please leave us a comment on Twitter at Insight Check Pod. You can also leave us a rating or review on iTunes. Please let it be a nice one. We are always reading those, and we're very appreciative when they come in. They help us a lot to get our brand out there. We would like to thank Amy T. Falcone for our faces, our cute little chibi branding on Twitter and everywhere else. Without you, we wouldn't have faces. We would like to thank Vin Sweat for their wonderful song Never Stand Alone, which we use at the intro and outro of every episode. And we'd like to thank you for listening.
Answering your cues from our collective A's. This
was
Insight
Check!
Why, yes. From me.
Hedonistic TTRPG.
Exactly.
Bacchanalian tabletop experience. That's okay. I will give it to you today. Because it's almost your birthday.
Yay!
Everybody wish Jay a happy birthday on Twitter. Woohoo!
It was way in the past.
Everybody wish Jay a happy belated birthday on Twitter. Woohoo!
X gonna give it to you.
I got tokens for my birthday.
Because first we're going to rock and then we're going to roll.